In crime literature, certain offenses are considered especially heinous. In LMS, the students are dedicated to determining the sanity of these cases. These are their stories.
All rise for the Honorable Judge Wallner. You may be seated.
We are here today to determine the sanity of narrator. The defendant has a written statement declaring involvement in the murder of the old man, but our purpose today is to determine the defendant's sanity for sentencing. Jury, your job today is to listen carefully to the evidence provided by the prosecution and defense. Based only on their evidence and the relevance it has to the legal definition of insanity, you will make a choice today as to whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty by reason of insanity. Do you understand?
Yes.
Okay then. We will start with the prosecution's opening statements. Counsel, you may begin.
We, as prosecuting attorney, are trying to prove that Mr. Narrator is sane. He is on trial because he has murdered an old man. The old man had been renting a room in Narrator's house. Narrator did very well managing the rent, which proves that he can manage his own affairs. Narrator carefully plotted the murder of the old man and cautiously executed the murder successfully without being caught. It took great precautions and concealed the body under the floorboards where nobody's eye could tell. His senses were very sharp, and he said himself that he was not insane.
Defense, you may present your opening statements.
Our client, Mr. Ader, as we all know by now, had killed a man. But what sane man can hear a heartbeat and be aggravated by it? What sane man thinks an elder man could have the eye of a vulture? The only way this could happen would be if the man was insane. The defense believes a man who couldn't control his actions shouldn't be punished the same as a man who could control himself. Thank you, Your Honor.
Will the officer who took the confession of narrator please approach the stand for questioning? Prosecution, your witness.
Officer Lambright, where was the body of Mr. Narrator found?
Under the floorboards, under the seat.
How did you find where the body was?
He started yelling and screaming and said that he killed the old man and put him under.
So he told you that he committed the crime because he couldn't handle keeping it to himself? So Mr. Narrator took all of these precautions to carefully hide the body so Officer Lambright wouldn't have been able to find it. Would a insane person have been able to plot out all these places to hide the body? No further questions.
Defense, the witness is yours.
Officer Lambrecht, what was Mr. Ader's behavior while you were visiting him at his residence?
He was very calm. Didn't seem like he had anything wrong in his life.
And then how did what was his behavior while he confessed to the crime of murdering a woman?
He spoke in gibberish and he did not really make any sense.
Did there seem to be anything that caused him to react in that way?
No.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it seems that he imagined something inside his head, and that caused him to confess in the way that he did. No further questions, Your Honor.
Will narrator please approach the stand for questioning? Prosecution, your witness.
Mr. Narrator, would you classify yourself as intellectually insane?
No.
Your confession states, it took me an hour to place my head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Would a bad man have been so wise as this? You are not saying that you are a madman there. You think that you are not insane. Is it true that you were taking many precautions for a long period of time as you were trying not to get caught while conducting the murder?
No, I did not take many.
So in his confession, it states, when I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at a length, a single dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot from out of the crevice and fell full upon the vulture eye. But even yet, I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. I kept pushing the door open steadily. For a whole hour, I did not move a muscle. No further questions.
Objection. Patience is one precaution, not many. What? Patience is one precaution, not many.
I will take that. Okay. Defense, the witness is yours.
Mr. Ader, what caused you to confess to the officer?
I was hearing the man's heartbeat on the floorboards.
The man who's already dead?
Yes.
So, a dead man would not have a heartbeat. Clearly, Mr. Ader imagined this. Once again, another symptom of his insanity. Can you, explain your motive for killing this old man?
I screamed as I suffocated him with his own bed.
Oh. He yelled, showing a lack of control over his own actions.
Objection. Yeah. What does screaming have anything to do with motive?
Yeah. That is really
I suppose I got my notes mixed up here. Forgive me, but I still got to the point, is what matters.
I was screaming because the heartbeat was frustrating to me.
Okay. Now we will hear closing arguments from each side. Prosecution, you are first.
Mr. Narrator is on trial to be classified as sane or insane. He carefully planned out the murder of old man and told of how his senses were sharpened. Narrator also rented out his place of living to the old man, which shows that he can manage himself and is able to run a place of living.
Objection! Where in the confession does it show that he rented out the house to the old man?
The shriek I said was my own dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took the visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest for their fatigues, while myself in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath reposed the corpse of the victim.
His chamber was his room that Mr. Narrator was renting out to him, as they both lived in the same building.
How do we know that they were not each renting it out from a separate person? They were both tenants.
there's no mention.
There's no mention of him renting out the home either. We can now make assumptions in this case.
Irrelevant. Jury, you are instructed to ignore that piece of evidence.
Okay, so then that means that Mr. Narrator was breaking and entering.
Objection, that's an assumption.
Well, no, if he's not living there, then he's breaking into his house.
Tenant. He said tenant. We're not making assumptions here.
Well, then he's breaking into his room.
That's an assumption.
Well, then how's he getting in there?
It's an assumption.
All we know is that the old man was living in the house and
Order in the court. Right? Continue.
Narrator suffocated old man with his own bed. Jury, in your honor, I ask you to imagine that this was your sweet old grandfather that was murdered, dismembered, and then hidden under the floorboards. What would you think of this awful person that did this to your grandfather?
Defense, you may present your closing arguments.
The client has shown time and time again throughout this incident his lack of understanding reality and his lack of control over his own actions. The defendant has confessed to hearing a sound that another witness claimed to hear, as well as compulsively attacking the victim. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, after all the evidence that has been proposed, how can you deny the fact that Mr. Ader is insane?
Now we will have time for the jury to deliberate. Remember, you must leave all personal feelings aside and look at only the evidence presented today and the definition of the law. Court will recess while the jury deliberates.
I would probably say he's insane because hearing heartbeat from a person that's dead and just hearing someone's heartbeat from that far away.
And then it said, he said that, the cop said that he was super calm when they got up there, and then he just started acting.
Yeah, he wasn't making any sense with his words, and he couldn't control himself, it didn't seem like.
I would say he's not, like, subject to uncontrollable behavior, or he is subject to controlled behavior because he didn't take any of the man's things, and they could have been really valuable, and he said they were left untouched.
He also had the patients to hide it under the floor.
And he also said that he killed him because of his eye looked like a vulture, and yeah.
He can take care of himself. Well, for one, he has a house.
So he's able to do that.
Yeah.
And what do you think?
Yeah.
You guys will need to make a decision. We're gonna run out.
Yeah.
Do we all think he's insane?
Yep.
Alright. Jury, have you reached a verdict?
Yes.
Yeah.
What did you find?
We, the jury, find narrator not guilty by reason of insanity.
Very well. Sentencing will be held at a later date. Court is adjourned.